Hello and welcome to Beebe Book Buzz and happy Halloween, everybody. We're here today with Katie Riordan and very special guest star, back and better than ever, Jeff Clapes.
That remains to be seen.
That remains to be seen, right? We'll see how he does. I just wanted to give you a quick note about an event we have coming up at the library that has to do with maybe one of your neighbors or friends. We are hosting our 4th annual local Authors Book Fair on November 23rd. It's a Saturday afternoon between 1 and 4. And you can come in and there'll be 13 authors there, lucky 13 on Halloween. 13 authors there who will be with a wide variety of books. Great time to shop for the holidays, to meet the authors. Between 2 and 3, there's going to be refreshments and some talks from the authors so you can get to know them a little bit better. And they'll be there to sign and sell their books. So come and join us. Drop in anytime between 1 and 4. Looking forward to seeing you all there. Today, we don't have all Halloween stuff for you, but we do have some. Katie's got the final word, and she's got the horror for you. I'm going to start today with a book that has some horror in it of a different kind. I would call this book, which is In Memoriam by Alice Wynne, the perfect mixture of a war story and a love story. It's epic on both those fronts, I would say. That's probably the best word for this book. There's a big sweep to it. To set the scene for you, it's kind of, think Edwardian Britain right before World War I, or right as it's starting. Think like E.M. Forster and Merchant Ivory and Morris and Howard's End, and think boarding school, think Downton Abbey during the war years, maybe throw in a little Chariots of Fire, you know, that kind of thing. But then you have to add like the grittiest war novels that or movies that you've seen, the ones from like All Quiet on the Western Front, Gallipoli. I don't know if you did you see that one, 1917, that came out just 2019? We're talking that level and then a lot of beautiful writing, references to all kinds of literary figures from the Romantics to the Greeks, and you've got quite a book. The settings are really important here, and there are 2 that kind of take us through the book. So the first setting is the public school setting where the boys of the story start out, and the second is the war itself, the front itself. So the public school, when I say public school, of course we're talking British public. It's not actual public school, it's private school, and it's for very, sort of the upper crust, right? At this time especially, public schools were the place where all the upper class folks went to learn, and they were single sex. And they were steeped in the glory of England and the empire and all this kind of stuff. They learned the classics. They learned all of literature. They were, all these kids are running around quoting this stuff. But they're also kids who, from a really young age, were like just kind of tossed in there by their parents, like from the age of 8, and so the kind of the ambiance of this place is like the Lost Boys, all together in this place. They knew these kids that they were living with for all these years, from the time they were 8 through the time they were 18, probably better than their families themselves, right? So there's this real sense of camaraderie, and there's this sort of idyllic freedom and that kind of thing. And there's also horrific like hazing and violence. I mean, they were terrible to each other, and it was all sort of seen as like this proving ground for for life, for leading England, right? Which is what they were all being groomed to do, or for fighting in a war, being officers in a war. So we start the book in this time when there's been no war for a century, and all these kids, like I said, in this kind of glory of England, all of this stuff is foremost in their minds, and the war begins, and we start with newspaper, the school newspaper, which has the honor rolls in it, which are the lists of the dead that are coming in from the front, the dead and the injured. So the names are being read off, and the names that these kids are hearing are just people that they were
People
just
they
in
know.
school with.
Yeah.
Yeah, just in school with last year, you know, and they're probably not, half of them weren't old enough to even have enlisted yet, right? So we start there, and you get this mixture of that idyllic lifestyle in a way, and then this creeping horror of those things coming in, and the kids' different reactions to it. And that's where we meet our two main characters. So there's Gaunt and there's Elwood. Of course, we only use last names here because we're in public schools, which is also, again, like the military. Gaunt is kind of tall and I don't know, he's a strong silent type. He sometimes makes points with his fists because he's a good fighter, but he actually doesn't like violence very much. He is very much against the war. And the other thing about Gaunt is he's actually German. So he's grown up in England. He considers himself English, but his parents are German. So oddly,
Do people know this about him?
Yes. Oh, yes. He's well known. And oddly, his mother and sister come to him and say, "You have to go and fight," because they are getting so much trouble for being German in England that they feel that if their son goes to fight in the war, then, you know, that will prove that they're loyal or whatever. And eventually he does. And the other character is Elwood. And Elwood is beautiful, and he's sort of the upper of the nobility. He's not a duke or anything, but he's kind of right up there, very wealthy, very old family. And he's beautiful and he's romantic, and he loves the beauty. He loves the idea of England, and he's he's totally bought that whole king and country, God and country, all that sort of stuff. And he is also very openly acknowledges that he loves men. He's gay. Cool. He has no, I say openly acknowledges. In that time, you couldn't openly acknowledge anything. You couldn't say. But in the code of the school and where people know what's what, it is known. And so the thing he can't acknowledge is that he is desperately in love with Gaunt. Oh. And Gaunt, likewise, can't really even admit to himself that he loves Elwood. They are best friends, but there's always the great tension in this book is this unspoken, this you know, will they, won't they be able to express themselves to each other. Gaunt goes off to war. Elwood stays behind for a while because he's a bit younger, and he also doesn't have the impetus to go, but they come together in the trenches at some point. They are actually fighting together. Oh, wow. And their love does get a chance to express, and then it doesn't. There's more. There's a lot. There's a lot of, so it's a great, great love story. There's a lot of stuff going on there. And then on top of that, you've got the trenches themselves, the front. And this is the war to end all wars, was what they called it at the time. This is like the Somme, where 60,000 British men were killed in a day. You know, they're coming in waves over the trenches, and they're just being mown down. And the author is very, very good at making you feel all of that. She doesn't pull any punches in. She's clearly done her research. It's gut punch after gut punch. It's gore, it's horror. It's hard, but she does it really well. And it's even better because you've met all these boys, the boys that have now come from this school and are now the officers. They're like they're 17, they're 18, they're officers leading people.
That's
over
what
these.
Amazes me about
It's insane.
Well, all wars, but particularly the First and Second World Wars, where in our heads we think of them as grown-ups going off to fight, and they were all like teenagers.
They were teenagers, and she really gets that movement from being those young kids in this. That's why, you know, the balance between the school and the front is so interesting and creates more tension in the book, dramatic tension. Just, you know, she just does it really, really well. You know them as kids, and then you see what the war does to them. So the scope of the book is only a few years, but by the time they're done, these characters are completely different in so many ways. And she does a really good job with just illustrating PTSD and all of the and the injuries and everything. So I mean, it's a great. My friend who recommended me this book hates violence in any form in any book, and
Yeah.
she this is like one of her favorite books ever.
Wow.
So I can say that like it'll pull you through. Like even
Yeah.
if you think it sounds horrible, go for it, try it. There's there's a lot of kind of great plot lines. There's there's a POW camp. There's escapes. There's and all through it this love story. So a lot of drama, a lot of scope, a lot of lessons about the toll of war. But it'll stay with you for a really long time.
It's making me think a little bit of All the Light We Cannot See, like a love story against the backdrop of a war, but this sounds more intense.
This is more intense.
Like
this is more intimate. It's really it's an intimate. That's the other thing. You've got this big scope, but there's an intimacy between all of the kids, the boys. What do you want to call them? I don't know what to call them. The soldiers. Between Gaunt and Elwood, I mean that's such a great relationship. She does it really, really well. Yeah, it'll stick with you. It's definitely one I would highly recommend. So
I think it will end up on my list.
yeah, I think you'd like it. Yeah, so
Over
Jeff.
to me. Actually, well, I won't talk about it now unless we have a couple of minutes at the very end. But this is something I was thinking of mentioning. That now, the more you talk, the more.
Is that the same time period, or is that?
No,
So that's-
very different time period, but a lot of similarities, which
Okay.
but only
right.
if we have time at the end.
Okay.
The book I actually wanted to talk about is Orbital, and it's by Samantha Harvey,
Yes.
and it's very short,
Nice.
exquisitely beautiful. You don't know this about me. I think Karen does. Every fall, I tend to try to read all of the Booker Prize nominees. The
Oh,
Booker
you did
Prize,
tell me this,
The Booker
yeah.
Prize comes out in the fall.
Yeah.
And if I have time, I tried. It's a good way for me to put a whole bunch of really good fiction on my list.
Right.
And I actually have managed to read all but one now. And this is one, for those of you who don't know, the Booker Prize is a major literary prize out of Britain. And it's awarded to fiction that is it has to have been written in English by someone who lives in a country that is either British, American, or part of the former Commonwealth.
Yep.
So you get South African writers, Irish writers,
Yeah.
Trinidadian writers, like all different kinds. And I've always enjoyed it. Anyway, this book was nominated, and it actually made the short list. We will find out the winner in a couple weeks, I think.
Oh wow.
It's usually like mid-November they announced. And this is a little different from, I think, what either of you are going to talk about, because it's easy to call it science fiction, but it's not.
Right.
I think it's perfect for someone who might kind of like the idea of science fiction, but doesn't really want it. It's actually not, there's no fi in it. It's very
no fiction.
I mean, it is fictional, but
Sure.
there's no aliens. What it is in brief, 6 people who are on the International Space Station, serving on the International Space Station, which zips around the globe at 17,000 miles or kilometers, I forget, per hour.
Right.
And so what's interesting is they see, I think they do 16 orbits per day, per Earth day.
Oh, wow.
So they actually see the sun rise and set 16
Wow.
times
Oh,
for every
that's
time that
cool.
we do,
I never thought about that.
which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
The other thing that is odd about this book is there really isn't a plot.
Okay.
And that's fine.
Right.
It's about the beauty of being in space and being separate from the Earth. It's just, well, I'm going to read you a very brief passage from it just to give you an idea. But
it's each person's perspective, different perspectives on
there
that.
are 2 women and 6 men,
Yeah.
and they're from a variety of different countries. 2 are Russian, at least one is American. I think there's a Brit, I forget. There's actually some very interesting practical stuff about it. That's, if you remember The Martian,
Oh yeah.
which I thought went way overboard in technical detail, but it's great if you like that stuff. But there were just some interesting things about what it's like to go through daily life and the physical processes of living on in zero gravity. They even, because it's the International Space Station and because of political stuff, they actually have the Russian bathroom and the other,
Segregation.
like, so, which they completely ignore.
Right.
But there's actually signs that say you're supposed to use your
Really?
national bathroom.
Is that true?
I don't know, actually.
okay.
I don't know if it's true, but it's in here. But like I said, there's no crisis, there's no aliens, no one dies, it's just life in such a different place. One of the things they talk about that I thought was very moving and is true is when, I believe it was Collins, the astronaut Collins, who took the photograph of the Earth from, and I forget which particular mission he was involved in. But he commented that he realized that the photo of Earth showed every human being in the world except for him. He was the only person who was not in the photograph.
Right.
And there was just, so a lot of the book is based on this idea of what is it like to be separate from other people, but stuck with 5 other people in this unique set of circumstances. You get the backstory of all the different characters, just enough so that they become human and their interactions. But really all it is most of the chapters are short and it's just exquisitely beautiful. I could not believe how gorgeous this writing was. So I'll just read one paragraph where they're talking about another sunrise and orbit. In the new morning of today's 4th Earth orbit, the Saharan dust sweeps to the sea in 100-mile ribbons. Hazy, pale green, shimmering sea, hazy tangerine land. This is Africa chiming with light. You can almost hear it, this light, from inside the craft. Gran Canaria's steep radial gorges pile the island up like a sandcastle hastily built, and when the Atlas Mountains announce the end of the desert, clouds appear in the shape of a shark whose tail flips at the southern coast of Spain, whose fin tip nudges the southern Alps, whose nose will dive any moment into the Mediterranean. Albania and Montenegro are velvet soft with mountain.
Wow. It does give you a sense of the perspective.
It's all about that perspective. And that kind of writing, I could seriously open this book to any random spot and read you a paragraph, and it would be that kind of voluptuous writing.
And do you get that about people too, or is it mostly?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because a lot of it is about the people and the people they've left behind. They have, one of the characters' mother passes away while they're in space, and how does that feel? How do you experience? There's a spacewalk. What is it like to stand with your feet like blocking out whole countries because you're floating above the world?
Right. It's amazing.
So that's why I don't want it to be thought of as sci-fi, because it isn't. It's actually remarkably earthly, because it's all about the perspective of human beings looking at Earth from a perspective where the overwhelming majority of us will never get to see this.
Yeah. How do you think they did their research for the author?
That's a good question. And this isn't her first book. She's written a bunch of stuff. And she's won or been nominated for a number of awards. But her writing is it's quite varied. So I don't know exactly what she did to pull this together. But it's if you want something that has a little bit of that wonder of science without being science fiction, and you want something short and gorgeous.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
I would highly
definitely
recommend
adding that to my list.
Orbital by Samantha Harvey.
Sounds a little bit like the writing that you talked a little while back about the time in COVID. You know, the one with the parrot on the cover?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Sigrid Nunez.
Yeah.
That one. Yeah, she has very beautiful language as well. Yeah. Okay, that's cool.
That one was also isolated too.
Yeah,
so
isolation,
cool.
Different kind.
Time to talk about spooky.
Now for something completely different.
Actually, I think it's a little similar, because the writing is very, very deep and meaningful in a short amount of time. So I'm here to talk.
We're talking short stories here.
Short story anthology over here. So it's Never Whistle at Night, an Indigenous dark fiction anthology. It combines 26 stories from 26 different writers in a foreword by Stephen Graham Jones. It's a beautiful, beautiful book, and it is deeply, deeply unsettling in so many different ways. And I think
Oh, I love that.
yes, it's very, very fun in that way. I would say that they pack so much into every single story that if you're just starting in the horror realm or you don't know where to start, this is a really good book to choose because there's so many different types of horror that are throughout it.
Right.
I would say that first, make sure you read the foreword. The foreword is pretty much, it's a deep way of explaining why this book was made and put together and how the stories are told and the mechanisms they use to tell these stories, because they're all Indigenous writers from all across, not just even America. It goes all the way down from someone down in Mexico all the way up to Alaska of Indigenous writers from all different nations. And it's just a beautiful way of showing how when you are from the culture, it's way better to tell the horror stories because you're not like infantilizing the culture, you're not taking away from the culture, you're actually using the horrors that are told from like parent to child properly, you know, without being like, oh my gosh, it's a Native American burial ground, you know. So that's what they use it, and they actually, those are not the scary aspects of it.
They built the houses.
They built the houses, exactly.
The
everyone's heard of things like that, or like, oh, it's a Wendigo, but these people actually have the stories told through generations, you know. So it's so different to hear it and what's actually scary to them and what is scary in their culture, you know. So it's very, I'm gonna like highlight one story particularly. It's called Kashtuka by Matilda Zeller, and it's she's of Inuit descent. So she is telling a story about a woman in a remote town in Alaska, and in this story she is told that she has to go work for a rich white man for the evening. She's going to be his cook. She doesn't want to do it. Her mom is making her do it. And her mom thinks that this is a way you can get forward in life, you know, just go work for the man. And she wants nothing to do with this situation, but it's just her lot in life. And if she didn't do it, her mom was going to send her younger sister, and she wanted to protect her younger sister from the evil white man, which is very true. And
So he is an evil white man.
He is an evil white man from the get-go.
Yeah, I'm sensing some foreshadowing.
There's a little bit of shadowing right there. Yeah, it's very cut and dry in that sense. But on the way there, he wants to hear all these stories, and she starts saying, I don't want to tell a story at night. And like, like we're not supposed to bring those types of evils out loud under the full moon. Like, we're not going to be doing that. And he's like, oh, it doesn't matter. So right from the get-go, you can kind of sense that fact that he thinks of her culture as just a spooky story, or not something that is actually something that could be dangerous,
that has
you know,
weight
and has weight.
So
during that whole situation, all of a sudden there is an attack of a creature called a Kashtuka, and she instantly knows that this is going to be a bad situation. And I'm not going to spoil it, so that's all I'm going to leave there. But she does have, it's this inner battle in this whole story where it's, you're not sure what the horror aspect is, because she's battling this Kashtuka for a second, but then she also is feeling very protective of it because it's being attacked by the white man, who's also taken a lot of artifacts, he calls. He's a collector. He takes collections of things that came from her town. She was walking around his house and said, that's my grandmother's right there. And he said, oh no, I got an art deal to get that. It's ancient. When it came from her house, you know? It's a part of her.
And a
like,
part of her
people.
culture that he's not recognizing.
Exactly. So it's one of those things where she, even though she knows that this creature is something that she should be afraid of because she's been taught to be afraid of it, she feels defensive of it because she doesn't want it to get hurt or it to be killed or disappear, because it's a very big metaphor for them taking everything, including the terrors, you know?
Right.
So if you like a lot of stories that leave it a little open-ended, this is the book for you, because it's not a tying it up in the perfect bow type of story. Everything is going to be left a little open-ended, and that's kind of how you want it to be. And it's Stephen Jones again. Stephen Graham Jones does a great job of explaining that in the foreword. I read it like 4 times. You should read the foreword, maybe even before every story, because it helps. It's like it's one page, but it really helps to explain why they leave it the way it is, because for a lot of Indigenous communities, these horrors are continuing.
Right.
Yeah. And a lot of the stories have the mythical side, but also the real life horrors of racism, colonialism, and just general generational trauma for some
Right.
of the stories. If
Right.
you really are scared of gore, a good story to start with, and this is Uncle Robert Rides the Lightning. It doesn't have a lot of gore in it, but it's just extremely lyrical, and it's beautiful, and it just tells the story of him during his life and the trials that he had to go through, coming from a community that is perpetually being put down, and then into the afterlife, and then beyond that even. So that
Wow.
was kind of
Cool.
very cool.
Yeah.
So
What
So-
was that one called again?
that one's called Uncle Robert Rides the Lightning by
Okay.
Kate Hart, who is
Okay.
of the Choctaw Nation. So
So I hope the guy in the other story comes to a bad end, but you're not supposed to
I'm
tell
not
us.
gonna tell
You're not going to tell us.
I mean, that's the other thing. You never know, and is that really what happens in real life? So
Yeah.
we don't know. Then I'm not
Right.
going to tell you. So
I'm not gonna tell you.
I'm not going to tell
You're
you.
not getting
It's
any
pretty
more out of
good.
me.
I would also say if you are interested in horror, make sure to read a lot of Stephen Graham Jones.
Yes.
He writes a lot,
Yep.
so and he has
He
a lot
does.
of things.
Yeah, some
Yeah.
really great books.
Really great book. This is the it says I Was a Teenage Slasher, a novel.
Yeah, he also wrote I think I talked The Only Good Indians a few bits back. I can't remember when. And then he's written a trilogy called the Indian Lake Trilogy in between
Yes.
those two. So he's a lot of people's favorite right now. He's great.
Yeah, as well as Rebecca Roanhorse, who is also in this trilogy.
Yes.
She writes some pretty good YA, which is also brings in a lot of her own personal cultural stories. So
Yeah,
that's very
and
cool.
not just YA. She writes for adults as well,
I didn't
right?
know that. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, Black Sun is
There's
adult.
Black Sun is
Yeah.
for adults.
Yeah.
That's another trilogy, I think.
Yes.
Not- yeah,
Yeah.
trilogy. Yeah.
But I think that one's in progress. Is there a third one?
There's a third one coming.
Yeah.
This. Am I right about that? Anyway.
There's two. One. The
yeah.
second one just
and
came out.
she's I also talked one of her like novellas, which was really good.
Yeah, the Angel Tread.
Yes.
Yes.
We're angels. Yes.
Yeah, that one's really good.
So, and on that note, we have at some point in the new year, we haven't put it quite on the calendar yet. We're going to have a documentary that comes from. It's called the Reciprocity Project, which is highlighting Native stories, that Native ideas of reciprocity and how it is part of all of. Again, this is kind of like this book from communities across. I guess it's all within North America. And no, I take it back. I think there's some South American as well. Anyway, we're going to be showing a film, which is a series of 7, I believe, documentaries made by each, a filmmaker in each community themselves that highlights the idea of reciprocity. So keep an eye out for that on the calendar in the new year.
Yeah.
Jeff, did you want to just say a quick
Oh, sure.
thing about
I can do like just
Alan Hollinghurst?
a 60-second, mainly because it really
Because it chimes in with this one?
What you were saying about that, I wouldn't call it a read-alike exactly, but it has a lot of similar appeals.
Right.
I just finished it because Alan Hollinghurst is one of my favorite British writers.
Yep.
He won the Booker Prize a number of years ago for The Line of Beauty, which was fantastic. And he's probably one of the best, one of the best British writers writing today,
Yeah.
and certainly the best gay British writer writing today.
Right.
But his stories are so much bigger than that. This one's called Our Evenings. It's the new one.
Yep.
And it's not really a love story. It's about there's a lot of stories like this where a sort of outsider person ends up connecting with a wealthy British family in some way. And in this case, it's a half Burmese. His mother was British. She got pregnant when she was in Burma. So he's half Burmese. He looks different from British people. And he wins a scholarship from this wealthy family, becomes friends with their son. They go through school together.
Right.
They have very different lives. The friend ends up being a right-wing Brexiteer. This follows probably several decades.
Right.
It starts in the 60s and goes right up to the present day.
Okay.
And he does that a lot. Line of Beauty was all about Thatcherite England. This one follows right up with Brexit always being sort of a backdrop.
Right. Okay.
But the writing is gorgeous. It's all about social castes
Right.
in Britain.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
there's
relationships and
I didn't even get to that in this one. There's some of that going on.
so
here,
if
too.
you like that kind of thing, it reminds me of a lot of other very traditional British stories where the different classes come together in different ways, and it deals a lot with racism.
Yes.
The main character becomes a actually famous actor
Right.
in Britain, but because he's dark and looks different, that affects his career and the roles he gets. And so, but the writing is gorgeous, just beautiful.
Yeah. Okay, so we got 4 for the price of 3 in this one. Yeah, actually, one thing I didn't say was this one, if you read Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, the themes are all very similar. Love between soldiers in a time of war, and it's such a...
I'm reading a novel about Alexander and Hephaestionus right now.
There you go.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
and
we could do a book list at this point.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, I think that's probably all the time we have, and we appreciate you spending the half hour with us, and we will see you next month on Beebe Book Buzz.